What if the global balance of power could shift, not because of war, not because of sanctions, not because of elections, but because of one African crop? What if a grain so humble, so simple, so historically overlooked by Western powers suddenly became the center of a global trade shockwave? A shockwave strong enough to weaken America's influence, strengthen India's position, and launch Africa into a new era of economic independence? This is not a hypothetical. This is not a prediction. This is the reality unfolding today as Africa begins selling massive quantities of sorghum to India, while completely cutting the United States out of the new trade corridor. This is the trade uprising nobody in Washington expected. It's the agricultural revolution the Western media is refusing to discuss. It's a geopolitical shift that marks the beginning of a new world order, one where Africa no longer sells according to Western expectations, but according to African interests. Welcome to Iazicho Africa, where we tell the stories reshaping the continent with clarity, power, and truth. Today, we dive deep into the historic Africa-India sorghum alliance and how America got pushed out. Before we discuss deals, alliances, and geopolitics, we need to ask a simple question. Why sorghum? Why this crop? Why now? Sorghum has been Africa's quiet champion for thousands of years. It is drought-resistant, heat-tolerant, low maintenance, high yield, essential for food security, powerful for industrial use, a strong biofuel source. Yet for decades, Western nations saw sorghum as secondary. America focused on corn, wheat, and soybeans. Europe focused on barley and maize. Sorghum, only a marginal interest. But Africa always knew its value. And India, with its billion-plus population and rapidly growing industries, recognized that sorghum could be the key to feeding its people, producing biofuel, and powering multiple industries. India understood something the United States failed to notice. Sorghum is the future of dry region agriculture, and Africa is the global king of sorghum production. The question is, why did Africa choose India instead of America? Unlike Western buyers, India approached Africa with partnership, long-term commitment, and financial fairness. Over the last decade, India has quietly built strong relationships across the continent through direct trade, infrastructure development, education partnerships, agricultural technology, sharing non-interference in domestic politics. No exploitative strings attached. So when African producers proposed a new sorghum export program, India didn't negotiate from a position of superiority. India negotiated as a partner. India offered higher prices than U.S. buyers, multi-year purchasing agreements, investment in processing plants within Africa, training for African agricultural workers, guaranteed transportation routes. Fair trade terms with no political demands. America couldn't match this. The U.S. wanted cheap sorghum, strict standards, political leverage, short-term deals, total control, so Africa made a historic choice. Sell to India. Cut out America. 6 major African sorghum giants came together for the first time. Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sudan, Tanzania, Kenya, South Africa. They formed a unified export bloc, a powerful group controlling almost 70% of Africa's sorghum output. Then came the announcement that shook Washington. India will receive priority access to African sorghum exports. American buyers are excluded from the new trade framework. This meant no U.S. agricultural influence, no lowball American offers, no exploitation, no Western monopoly. India had become the #1 buyer. America had officially been cut out. To understand the shock in Washington, you need to know something important. The U.S. relies heavily on agricultural leverage to control global markets. That leverage includes wheat, corn, soy, barley, cotton. But sorghum was one of the few crops where the U.S. had strong global influence. Now, by losing Africa's sorghum supply, America is losing control over global sorghum prices, bargaining power in African trade, influence over African agricultural policies, their place in the global South food chain, leverage in U.S. India food negotiations. Politically, this is a disaster for Washington. Economically, it is a blow. Strategically, it is a humiliation. Diplomatically, it is a warning. Africa is no longer waiting for American permission. Here are the real reasons African leaders said no to America. U.S. buyers pushed African farmers to sell at low prices, while American companies made huge profits. India offered fair prices. U.S. trade deals often come with democracy lectures, governance interference, hidden obligations, aid dependency. India offered no political strings. India offered stable, guaranteed demand. India agreed to help Africa build mills, storage facilities, processing hubs, biofuel facilities. India valued Africa. India didn't just sign buying contracts. India launched an India Agricultural Industrialization Plan, which includes building sorghum milling plants in West, East, and Southern Africa, funding storage silos and grain banks, creating African-owned processing companies, joint branding of African sorghum products, job creation for millions of African youth, technology transfer for farmers, crop insurance programs. This is exactly the type of respectful partnership Africa has been demanding for decades. India is not coming to extract. India is coming to build. And that is why Africa chose India. This sorghum mega deal will change Africa in several ways. Millions of African farmers will finally earn higher incomes. African export revenues will rise dramatically. Processing industries will increase jobs and domestic value. Africa will no longer rely on U.S. export monopolies. African nations will gain bargaining power globally. India will help stabilize African supply chains. Africa becomes a global agricultural influencer, not just a supplier. This is a win for the continent, economically, politically, and strategically. America is scrambling to respond, but it's too late. Here's why they cannot reverse this. India already locked in long-term contracts. African producers won't break 10-year deals. America cannot match India's prices without hurting their domestic producers. Africa will not accept political conditions anymore. India's investments give it structural control of the supply chain. The world prefers multipolar trade, not Western dependency. This is one of the first times in decades the U.S. has lost a major African commodity, and they have no way to get it back. The Africa-India Sorghum Alliance is more than a trade deal. It is a symbol of a rising global South that no longer accepts Western dominance. It represents shared history, mutual respect, economic partnership, cultural bonding, strategic collaboration. Africa and India are now producers, processors, and global influencers. Asterisk asterisk. This partnership will spill into technology, manufacturing, defense, digital trade, infrastructure. This sorghum deal is only the beginning. This deal shows the world something powerful. Africa is no longer waiting. Africa is no longer begging. Africa is no longer dependent. Africa is choosing partners that respect it. And India is stepping forward as a new global power aligned with African aspirations. America must now adjust to a world where Africa has more choices. India has more influence. The West has less control. The age of unilateral Western power is fading, and the age of Africa's self-defined future is rising. This sorghum deal is more than agriculture. It is more than economics. It is more than geopolitics. It is a declaration of independence. Africa is telling the world, we choose our partners. We choose our future. We choose what benefits our people. India understood Africa. America underestimated Africa. And Africa responded with a decision that stunned the world. As we move into this new era of global trade, remember this moment. The moment when one humble African crop reshaped global alliances and forced the world to rethink Africa as power. This is Iazicho Africa, bringing you the truth behind Africa's transformation.